Right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining this session. It's very much a working session. When Kevin and I work with clients, we often talk about getting a minimum of a 20-to-1 return on the effort and money you put into your relationship building. But then how do you work out that 20-to-1 return? That's what the next 45 minutes is about. How do you put the numbers against the effort and investment you should be making in the relationship capital that the organization has and where you put that money and effort? We'll be going through a bunch of models, and we're delighted that on this call also we're joined by our friends at IntroHive, who will talk about some of the additional data that you can capture, you may not even know you've got, that will help you manage and design better your relationship strategy in the organization. So I'm Stuart Maister, and with me is Kevin Vaughan-Smith.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Stuart. I'm just going to take us quickly through the health and safety. As you'll know, if you've done these things with us before, they are recorded, and we will send you a copy of the recording, but others may be able to download it as well. Typically, we've had lots of discussion on these. Today, we're going to try and get through a lot of content. So if there are points you'd like to make, can I suggest that you use the chat box as a way of raising questions, and either Stuart and I will get back to you, or we'll bring it into the conversation. And finally, because there is so much stuff today, we're going to offer you the opportunity to download a version of the slides at the end. There'll be a link in the chat box for you. So health and safety over. Stuart.
Thank you. And we're not expecting any fire alarms either. Okay, so let's start by thinking about strategy in terms of your relationship capital. You have a relationship capital, but where are you going to invest it? Now, if you've been on any of our web seminars before, you'll be familiar with this model that we use as a fundamental bit of thinking. Because what we're suggesting is that the aim of what you're trying to do is go from bottom left to top right. And the way you do that is by making yourself more difficult to substitute, because not just because of the service you're providing, which often is more easily substituted than you'd like to think, but because of the relationship you have and the trust that exists between you and the client. And it may be also with your supply chain and so on. So that's what we've talked a lot about doing. Today, we're going to say, what is it worth? What is it worth if you do that? We have, as a way of looking at the value, quite a sophisticated pipeline model, as you can see here. Now, the point about our pipeline model is that it's not just about winning the business, it's about the way in which you deliver the business, that you're continually engaging in conscious relationship building. You're consciously seeing the delivery of the project, the work you're doing, the product you're providing, as a contribution towards building a partnership. Not all clients are going to be willing to build that partnership, but many are. And what we're suggesting is that we're not talking about the wedding, which so many people think about, the deal. We're talking about the marriage that we want to have, which is the delivery and then the ongoing partnership that we wish to have. So just as a way of thinking about, to kind of help frame the discussion, let's just run our first poll if I can.
Yeah, let me pick that up. So when I first was managing director at Franklin Covey some years ago, there'd been some research done by Franklin Covey about how people selected complex service providers, long-term potential providers. And I've done that research again with literally thousands of professionals and hundreds of clients of those organizations. And there are lots of reasons that people select a provider, but when you sort of analyze it, there were 4 key areas that stepped out. So I'd like you to help me with the same poll. The first reason they said was technical expertise. Can you do the job? The second was business case, which is what's the return on investment look like? The third was team fit. When I look across the table, do these people look like a joined up team? And fourth was cultural fit, which comes down to, do I want these people around my business? So I'd invite you now to pick what you think were the top two of those four, because two actually stood out for clients consistently. Have a moment, pick your top two.
So just got a few more seconds. Most people have done it, just a little bit more, and then I'll share the results for you to comment on. Okay. So a couple more, just a couple more. You want to vote? Okay. I'm going to end the poll there and share the results, and you'll see what people have voted.
Okay. Well, this is interesting. So many people will, especially if you ask professionals, will tell you it's about technical expertise. Some will tell you it's about price, but just as you've done, the overwhelming belief in the market, both the clients and the professionals servicing it, is exactly as you think. It's about team fit and cultural fit. And look how strongly you've all put cultural fit, which is relationship. Team fit and cultural fit. It's a relationship. So the clients are telling us, and thousands of professionals, and you're telling us that it's all about relationship, which is amazing, because having also reviewed thousands of win and loss reports and heard stories of these, when people lose, they always lose on price. But when they win on relationship. So we all know it. Let's think about how that applies to some of these areas of the flow here.
Can I just say to people, just quickly say, if you want to, you might want to close the poll on your screen, because just click the X on the box to close the poll so it doesn't dominate. Because we close it our end, but it may not close your end. Sorry, Kev.
No, good old Zoom. So look, rather than go through this whole complex model, let's use a simplified model. This actually may represent something much more similar to the sort of things you're looking at in your pipeline, because most people, I don't know anybody who's not running a pipeline, but it tends to be simpler. So what we're going to look at is, how does improving relationship change 4 key relationship indicators we call key relationship indicators, KRIs. The 4 we're going to look at are simple. The first one is, I'm going to suggest to you, if you analyze your new wins, you're probably almost certainly making a loss if you're just chasing new win business without relationships. Secondly, if you have stronger relationships, your pipeline conversion rate will improve through each level. Thirdly, we're going to look at, once you've won it, how does improved relationship translate into improving your margin in delivery? And fourthly, we're going to say, if you know, some people know how to make good relationships in your business, how well are you translating that into being business as usual? And we call that move the middle 60. So those are the 4 key relationship indicator areas we're going to look at. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so we've used a business, let's call it Elgiva, and this is all of Stuart and I's expertise, if you like, and experience brought together into an example client. Elgiva is a services company, tends to want to do significant projects with clients. Let's look at some background data on them. They're not a huge company. They're about 80 million turnover. They got 40 salespeople. They measure the number of leads that they bring in. And for every 100 leads, they hope to convert that to 33 opportunities. That becomes 11 bids. So they've got about a 3-to-1 ratio all the time. This is not unusual. In my experience, win rates of between 1 in 8 and 1 in 12 on new business, pretty standard. Actually, though, when you look at it, your lead to win ratio is 1 in 18, but that's a different thing. So they've got that ratio. What's it costing them? Well, to go through those 100 opportunities, you need to call them up, you need to do desk research, you send out the email to everybody saying, has anybody ever worked with so-and-so? You qualify them, then you go on meetings with, let's say, the 33, follow-up meetings, you do outline initial proposals, blah, blah, blah. We're saying, and this I think is cheap, we're saying that typically you'll spend about, you'll do that number of meetings. And then you decide to bid some. And that's when the internal bid team kicks in. That's when the PowerPoint guy turns up. That's when you start having bid reviews, blah, blah, blah. There's so much effort goes into these things. People call them bid analysis. It's actually a lot of guesswork going on. And the whole thing, we think, costs probably 25K minimum in that internal process. So now we've got the bids costing us 25K. We've got the 50 meetings we're going on. Let's look at how that all works out. Oh, by the way, when we did the bid review, we promised the bid review team that we'd make 50% margin. When we went out and had a little chat with the client and actually won it, we turned out to get 38%. So we got our costs here, 265K. That's your bids plus your opportunity meetings. Hey, you've won 4. That's made you 500K. Sadly, even at your planned margin, you've lost 40K. And at the reality margin level, you've lost 110. So the key thing here is to think, why is it we keep chasing the shiny new opportunities? Why is it that new gets so much more celebration? And I know we've got Alan Mercer from IntraHive, and Alan, you've had some of this experience as well, haven't you? Are you muted, Alan?
Yes, sorry, technical difficulties. Yeah, just very simply, working in law firms myself, there was always a celebration of new clients being won. And the question I asked to partners at the time was, you know, is £50,000 from a new client better than £50,000 from an existing client? And you know, there's a trick question in there, obviously, but often the answer was that the new client was more favourable. But then when you start to consider the amount of time and effort to win that new piece of work, and the margins on that work, then normally, if you could ascertain that, the £50,000 from the existing client was always far more profitable and won more quickly.
Yeah, well, thanks, Alan. So that's my experience. When, you know, the number of announcements in the business about successes were all about new names. Hey, we've won this new name, new name, new name. And the frustration for many accountings was, well, what about the fact we just extended? Never got a mention. So that's the first KRI. The second KRI to think about is this flow through your pipeline. Now, look, I put up Elgiva's numbers on the left here because that's typical experience. And that's good, as I've already said. Getting that many wins in new name, new business as a percentage is good. It's transactional, however. We're chasing RFPs. Even if we refine which RFPs, we're still chasing them. On the other hand, if we can understand what it takes to make great relationships and flow through that, my experience is it's very simple to get that 100 leads to become 40 opportunities. And now we're starting to meet with stakeholders. We're meeting and understanding in depth what they're trying to achieve. We're shaping what they're trying to achieve, even to the level that we may help them write the RFP, and it will cover more stakeholder needs. For that reason, trust builds. And when trust builds, we get our opportunity to bid rate goes up significantly. I've only shown it a little bit, but 16 bids now come through. And by the time we get into a presentation with the people, we know them. We have a personal relationship with the key stakeholders and decision makers. We demonstrate we understand exactly what they're trying to achieve and how we work with them. And our win rate is much higher. I've suggested here 50%, but I can tell you that I have run businesses where we achieve 75 to 80% win success at bid level. And the ones that we didn't win typically didn't go anywhere else. We just demonstrated it wasn't the right thing to do. Now, that's great. What does that mean in terms of numbers? Simple. If you can achieve only these partnerial approach numbers, you can get twice as much money. You can put $1 million on the top line, 500K of additional margin into your business simply by focusing on relationships.
Be really interested if you've got any thoughts, comments on that. Please put it in the chat box in the Q&A. We will come to them, and we will have time later to have more of a discussion about it. So we've had 2 KRIs. Now, remember the thought that this isn't just about winning, this is about doing in a way that builds relationship. And what happens if you behave in that way? And also you're working with clients that you consciously designed those relationships with. What happens? Well, let's take what happens now. We know what happens now from the numbers that Kevin shared earlier. So the planned margin that we had was £40 million from all of those different salespeople, because we had a 50% plan to make on the money on the 80 million. In fact, on average, we make less than that. And if any of you watching this don't believe that that is reality, I'd be surprised. If you don't, please put the point out. We'll talk about it. But that is just life currently. And the result of the 38% is a big drop in the gross margins, a big gap. Now, why is that, Kevin?
Well, so many times, you know, I've sat in these meetings where we talk about this stuff. Fascinating. I was with one client for a long time, and they set out a goal for that 50% margin. And it's fascinating how every bid that came for review was at 50.1 or 50.2. But by the time it got to the client, we were getting much more like 38. Why? Because we're desperate to win. We don't have the relationship. It's a transaction. So we overpromise. We put added value in. We then come face to face with the reality of negotiation. And because of that need to win, when the client says, hell, you're too expensive, what we do is we fold. What we do is we give in. And giving 10% away seems to be completely, nobody bats an eyelid. 10%, yeah, that'll be no problem. Now then, we don't only do that pre-award, we do it post-award as well. We allow scope creep. We allow uncharged work. We take this master-servant relationship because not only did we commit to 50% margin, we promised that this was going to be jam tomorrow. And we're desperate for that jam tomorrow to turn into reality. Now, again, interesting story from IntraHive. Ryan, I think from IntraHive, you mentioned a relationship that perhaps didn't provide jam tomorrow.
Yeah, that's an example we were just chatting about yesterday. And just a word of caution, really, about managing stakeholders effectively. So this is an example from a previous client, a previous company of mine, and one of their clients, it was a £25 million per year client, everything going swimmingly, got the dreaded call that there was a vendor consolidation exercise ongoing, 5 vendors to 3. At the time, my company was number 2 vendor. So actually there was a bit of rubbing of the hands and thinking, well, actually we can probably end up coming out of this much better, and sense of optimism. Long story short, go through the vendor consolidation exercise, get an email one fine day. Sorry to inform you, but you have not been selected as part of this vendor consolidation exercise. Shock, horror, literally, jaws on the ground. The head of Europe at the time phoned their CIO to say, we're literally shocked. We can't understand this. Has it been a mistake? And his words were quite striking. He said, well, I'm shocked that you're shocked. This was actually a very simple exercise. I have 44 people reporting to me, and I asked each of them to choose their top 3 vendors, and not a single person chose your company, not one at any level. And when we get into the detail then to understand why that happened, and that's the analysis I did, we realized that actually the people we were working with and delivering for were very happy, but they weren't the people being asked to fill out the Excel sheet. It was their boss or their boss's boss, and in one case, their boss's boss's boss. And we completely lost sight of who our key decision makers were, who the stakeholders were that we needed to be in touch with. So a very somber note after many, many years of hard work, but it just shows what can happen when complacency sets in.
Yeah. So that was a total loss of margin. Stuart.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I mean, it's such a great story, and I'd be surprised if anyone who's worked in large organizations or with large organizations wouldn't have a shiver out down their back at the thought of that. So what is the alternative? What is the alternative? Well, the alternative, guess what, is what we've been saying all along. And what does that do to margins? So if you're in a partnership with a client, now, let me just say something here. Not every client is in this perfect nirvana, okay? We're talking about a spectrum here. We're trying to move people from bottom left to top right. They will be at various stages on that journey, but that's the journey we're consciously, actively trying to go on. So, the goal at the end of the path, if you like, is this stuff, which is that the margins are accepted. They're agreed, you know, the outcomes are agreed. It's more predictable. And underpinning this, as opposed to the master-servant relationship that Kevin described earlier, is the mutual value relationship, the sense that on both sides, we both need to derive value from this activity that we're doing together. We accept and recognize that and celebrate it. And in fact, once you do that, what you can then do is achieve much more together. The ambition of the value you create together becomes much higher. So it's a great outcome for the client if only they would see it. But also, of course, for the people that are delivering it, the margins go up. There's a lot of other boxes that get ticked in terms of employee satisfaction, retention, and so on, because it's much better work. And so this comes down to this idea that this marriage we're in is that we're there for keeps. We see all these things we're doing as part of building partnership. Because if we do that, guess what happens when we go back to our bigger pipeline model? What happens is that these partnerships that we're building drive the decisions about where we invest our relationship capital. And by the way, this is interesting if you're on the client side of this equation, and many companies will be both sellers and buyers. If you're a client, you should be aware of this, because if your suppliers or partners are also going through this analysis and you're not behaving in a partnerial way to them, you're just trying to drive them down, you know, just squeeze them on price, just get a hold of them and squeeze hard, then essentially they may do the same thing. And we had some great examples of this in recent days of where this happens, and people potentially lost strategic suppliers because they weren't behaving in a partnerial way. So this works both ways. The return on relationship actually cuts both ways if you look at it, the big picture.
So I just want to now look at the last of the KRIs that we're interested in. What we know is that in many businesses, there are people who are already demonstrating great relationship building skills. But we also know that they're deeply inconsistent. And I'm sure IntraHive will talk about how we can find the good. But let's assume in your business, just take an average, that 20% of your people are already doing good things to build good relationships. There's another proportion, and we'll say 60%, who, if they knew what they needed to do and were given the skills to do it, would adopt those behaviors. And then there may be 20%, let's say, who, you know, they're like the horse taken to water. Well, you could give these people champagne and they still wouldn't change their behavior. But that, funnily enough, is where we tend to spend most of our training and development and coaching and management time. What I'm saying to you, don't. Ignore the bottom 20%. Let them find life's new reality. Focus all your effort on understanding how those 20% build relationships and transferring the belief and the skills to the middle 60. And this idea is, again, something that we worked on heavily in Franklin Covey. It's a great one. This is where you'll make more money in most organizations than any other single intervention, if you can get people to understand what it takes to move towards the top 20% in relationship building. Now, the interesting thing is, when you do that, the top 20% also want to stay the top 20%. So they'll move right. But our ambition is to close this gap and make it righter and tighter, as they say. Now, let's look at some numbers. Go back to our old friends at Algiva. Remember this sales team? That's the gap of 1.1 million. By the way, they weren't ever going to make the 80 million forming the way they are. So we need this whole thing to move right. But let's imagine that we can't get the whole of the middle 60 to perform as well as the top 20. Let's imagine we can only get half of them halfway on average. What does that do for the figures? Well, have a look at this. Taking half the people, half the way across the 1.1 million gap, you generate 6.6 million of incremental top line.
So one of the jobs here is to replicate those behaviors across the business. Now, what we've talked here a lot about are, if you like, the lag indicators, the outcomes we're seeking to achieve, the better margin, the better, the higher turnover, and all of those lag indicators. What's historically been more difficult to measure are the lead indicators. What is it that we're doing in our business? Let's measure that to see if we're behaving correctly, if we're investing properly in these relationships to prevent the kind of outcome that Ryan mentioned. And this is a great opportunity now to invite our friends from IntraHive. We've got Alan and Ryan on the call. So let me come to you first, Ryan, if I can. So we're now looking inside the organization. I know you look closely at this. Do you mind putting your camera on too? We'd love to see you. What is it, talk me through, if you would, what is it that makes a great relationship? You know, the anatomy of a great relationship.
Yeah, you might need to put the camera on your side if you can.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you carry on, and I'll fiddle around with that on my end.
So that's the age-old question, isn't it? What does good look like? And it's actually a question I've had my heart for quite a few years. So for the last 5 years, I've been researching at doctorate level the answer to that question. How do you identify what the best of the best are doing? And as you mentioned before, actually, I went to the clients. So I interviewed very senior executives from FTSE 100 or Fortune 5,000 companies. And I asked them, think of the best salesperson you've ever worked with in your career. And some of them went back 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, and they had one individual in mind. And I said, let's unpick what made that individual so special. And there was 3 really layers to it. So the first one, as you might expect, is probably the most important one, which is trust. So sitting behind that in my thesis is the trust equation. And it's a very formulaic way of measuring trust and the components of trust. So I had a discussion around how those special individuals built trust. The second layer was something I called cognitive capital. So this is things in the subconscious I wanted to understand about. Maybe there was something happening that was connecting the 2 individuals about their background, same personality, same sense of humor, same academic background, or some other things that we could pull on. So that was interesting to try and uncover. But the third one, and I think this is the foundational layer, is what I call structural capital. So this is the structure to the relationship. And it's, if you think about when you're initially forming and building a relationship, it's really about the type and frequency of communication. And that's something that you can measure.
Well, just talk a bit about that. How do we find that data? How do we measure it?
Okay, so you can hear me. So Ryan's alluded to the fact that, you know, relationships are very much, always have been, always will be a human endeavor. It is a relationship between 2 people. However, what you find now is that in today's connected world, the relationships you're having, the communications you're having leave a digital footprint. So imagine, you know, the email sent, the call, the phone call, the text, the meeting in your work calendar, social media. You'd be hard pressed to not have a relationship now, either personal or business wise, that doesn't leave a digital footprint of the communication. And in those communications are clues to not only who do you know, but how well do you know them. So what we find is that businesses tend to have treasure troves of data that already exist within their organization, relating to the B2B relationships that their people are having. So, you know, just looking at the metadata, we call it, of those digital footprints, the tos, the froms, the date, the time, you can very accurately work out not only who do we know, but who these people are. So when I say who are they, where do they sit in their organization? What is their role? What is their seniority? You can look at job title, function, and ascertain the importance of this person in any given decision-making activity. You can also work out who in your organization knows these people, who's been interacting with them. And based on that, what communications are taking place. So you can ascertain all of that just by looking at the data that exists, the footprints of the communications between them. And then you can actually score those relationships and give weighting to the types and levels of communication. So, IntraHive has uncovered around 30 touch points. But if you look at the very basics of the level of communication, how often are they communicating, and what's the cadence of that been? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Is it reciprocal? So are these people replying to your communications, and how quickly, for example? The type of communication, is it just email? Is it transactional? Or are there meetings, and are these meetings taking place face-to-face? Are they 2 hours over lunch every Friday, or are they just 10 minutes on a Monday morning? And who's involved in those communications? So are other people in both of the organizations involved? And what is the seniority of those people? So like I say, there's not an exhaustive list there, but there are many, many touch points within those communication patterns that can give you a very accurate picture of who you know, who they are, and how well.
So what's interesting actually is, in your experience, Alan, how many organizations actually track this stuff? I mean, a lot of them will, all of them probably will have some kind of CRM system. So that should give them a lot of data. But how many are tracking the things that you're discussing?
Yeah, in reality, very little. And if so, it's not institutionalized. It's certainly maybe their top 10 clients where they're making, their key accounts where they're making the more effort. But to track this across your 1,000, 2,000 customers live on a day-to-day basis isn't possible manually. However, where around their top key accounts, generally the ones giving them the most revenue. But even then, it's very much ad hoc, unplanned. It's unsophisticated in its manner. Simply, very subjective measures. This person says they have a good relationship with that person, and often behind that there may be some hidden agenda, some ego, or some sort of remuneration-based approach to, it's going to be good if I'm seen to have a good relationship with this person. And very often, you alluded to it earlier, it's as simple as sending an all-staff email. Does anybody know this company, and how well? And obviously the response to that is often limited and normally very inaccurate.
We just had a question in actually from Rose. How do you track it? Can you sort of spell a little bit more about how you track this stuff?
Yeah, sure. So we're a technology solution, and as I said, within your business, you will have various systems that hold this data. So one of the main sources of this information is your email or your Outlook system, the Gmail, etc. And in there, you can see imagine the thousands and thousands of communications in and out a day, where simply looking at the to, the from, the date, the time of those communications, you can gain a very clear picture of who it is you're communicating with and who is communicating with them and how often.
Okay, great.
I believe, Alan, you can also interrogate phone records and other systems.
Sure, it's not just limited to email, although, there is huge value in that system. I think, email is still ubiquitous in terms of B2B relationships. A conversation might start over social media, but as soon as it becomes more business related, you tend to bring it into your corporate email system. But you're right, Kevin, we can track, we can see call logs. We could, we can also pull in information from other systems. You mentioned CRM, Stuart, and, I said before that many businesses have invested in CRM systems, believing that these will give them that 360-degree view of their clients. CRM in itself, these projects often fail due to the fact that the data in them isn't as trustworthy. It's very much predicated on busy people having to stop what they're doing and re-key information that already exists into these systems. So who do I know? How well do I know them? And what activities am I engaging with them on? So these systems often become you know, the white elephant, expensive system that no one uses, and the data in it is untrustworthy. So we basically, once we found all this rich information, we can automatically pop that into your CRM, and from there you can obviously then build reports, dashboards, etc., to give you insights from that data. But getting the data is the key part.
Yeah, starting point of the journey. Right. Well, look, thank you very much. We've got 10 minutes left in total. We would now love to open it up. We've already got a question in the Q&A box, so feel free to either put something in the Q&A box that you can find. If you can't see it, just put your mouse around, and you'll see the bar, and Q&A is one of those options. Or in the chat, we're looking at both of those. And also, what you can do if you just want to have we as much like to hear from you as anything else, to be honest. So next to your name, you can put your hand up, and that's actually what I'd really like to hear somebody talk. And I can just open you up if you wish to speak and contribute, ask questions, make a point. We'd love to hear your experience in this. Sorry, Kevin, you can.
I was just going to say, so Glenn's asked a question about data segmentation. You can probably see the question, Alan. How would you respond to that?
Okay. So yes, again, this huge raft of data that we can find in your various systems, of course, needs to be, you know, visually represented, but also cleaned, enriched, and deduplicated, for example, before it's fit for a human being to analyze it. But certainly, finding the data is one thing, Glenn. Obviously, then turning that data into meaningful insights is another matter, which technology now can obviously help you with that.
Yeah. Now, of course, you've got the data. What do you do about it next? That's just a lot of the stuff we talked about today. You know, that shows you gaps. I'd like, if I don't see hands go up, can I pick on a couple of people, because I do like doing that. Caroline Hinchcliffe, I see, is on the call. Caroline, if I allow you to talk, I'd love you to come in. Now, Caroline has very much been on the buying side of the equation, and I'd just be interested in your observations on this stuff, whether you think that buyers are open to that journey we talked about with the sellers, as it were, from bottom left to top right, and whether that therefore is a financial, you can have open conversations about the money involved.
Yeah, thanks for picking on me again, Stuart. I don't know why you always pick on me.
I know you'll say something interesting, that's why.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm, as you know, I'm in between jobs at the moment. I'm going from the buyer side to the supplier side. So there's two elements to this I'm finding quite interesting. Certainly from the buyer side, where I was in a government organisation, the procurement obviously is limited in the sense of the relationships, has to follow the procurement regulations. So actually, going back to the poll that you did earlier, when government organisations choose suppliers, they're really not allowed to choose on team or cultural fit. They have to do it on technical expertise and price. So that's a limitation. I don't know that's necessarily the right thing, but that's how they're limited at the moment. And therefore, they're also limited on how they can talk about the price and negotiate, and also sort of excessive sort of relationships, in the sense of, you know, working collaborative is a little bit restrained, I think. And I think a lot of that is legacy, and the government sectors are moving away from that, but it's almost entrenched in a lot of people that work there. So they find that quite difficult because it feels slightly abnormal to them. On the other side of that coin, from the supplier perspective, I see, in terms of the relationships, there's a lot of, in the industry I'm in, there's a lot of middle-aged men going out and drinking and doing lots of cheers around lots of glasses of goodness knows what, which is almost like a superficial level of the relationship building. And one of my questions was going to be, do you think that sort of relationship building that's done away from the office and away from the sort of commercial values is actually useful, or is it just superficial? And actually, when it comes to the crunch and they choose their customer of choice, they don't care how many beers they've bought you, or does it matter to them, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think that Intrahive can unfortunately track the beer drinking you've had, but I'll tell you the interesting. It's a really interesting point you're alighting, if I may, and this is a really big issue. I think it's particularly, we talked to Michael's on the call about what it's like in Asia. So much when people talk about relationship, they think they mean our key account person has a great relationship with their key buyer, and that's a relationship. So that's all cool, isn't it? No. We're talking about organizational partnerships where the organization behaves in certain ways that is partnerial on both sides of the equation. So that A, is less vulnerable to one person leaving, for example. And secondly, it's a genuine a way of building value together, not simply, I'll give you this gig, don't worry. That can't happen, as you know, in government. And one final thought, and I want to bring in Liz, if I may, who's on the other side of that, in exactly the same sector, Liz Robinson. The other thing about that is that when this crisis broke, we were due to have a conversation with the Cabinet Office, who are looking at rewriting the playbook, as you know, they've written it once, to talk about how you can build relationship, because they realize this is how you actually generate more value for the taxpayer by not simply commodifying and crushing people on price. And obviously the great example of that was Carillion. Liz, you're on the other side of this as a key account person selling into exactly the same sector that Caroline's talking about. Do you want? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually think that there is some value in the beer drinking aspect. Not that I'm just like advocating lots of beer drinking, but I think a lot of understanding a bigger corporation actually comes down to the individual characters within the business, and by understanding what drives them as a person out of the work environment, actually you get a greater understanding as to what motivates them and how then that translates into business. So the other side of things is that I think there's a perception that you've got a key account manager and that's the one person that then is the conduit for all conversations is dangerous at best. And the ability to build relationships strategically and not just at project level is the bit that makes you understand the client closer to then inform how you approach a tender. So being able to build the relationships, whilst obviously procurement regulations then dictate how that happens and through cost and quality. And I do think, actually, I should note that the cost element is going to change quite dramatically over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. I don't think that there is a leg to stand on now from a low cost value, which is why tenders through Highways England are no longer looking at 50-50 in sort of like equal balance, but actually they are looking more in the way of the quality and the technical expertise being preferential. They are also looking at how they do move away from low cost to mean cost, so that it's not something that is that they're not just promoting that you put in a low cost tender to then get into the commercial and the contract so that you can then negotiate going forward. But the understanding of your client has to be something that is an understanding both on a professional and a personal level, I think.
We're running a bit short of time. Caroline, I'd love to let you come back on that. If this were a radio chat show, we'd have two people from the same sector. It would be a fascinating conversation. I have to stop it. I'm sorry to everyone else. We've got a bunch of questions, we've got a bunch of comments. I do apologise, but we're very keen to keep to time because we think that's what people value. So let me ask Kevin just to summarise some of what we've gone through, and then I'll wrap
so
up.
we started off saying it's about making this move to relationship, and we've demonstrated 4 key relationship indicators that we think if you focus on relationships will all move. So we're going to make this move from bottom left, Stuart, to top right. Then 2 areas to look at. First of all, we're going to tell you that the cost of acquiring business as a percentage of your revenue will fall. And the more you can get into partnership, the larger the deals you'll get, the more consistent. And the other thing we're going to tell you is that when you start to measure relationships over the lifetime of an account, not just winning new business, but looking at how you increment new services, new service lines, your total account lifetime profit would rise. And we call the gap between those 2 things the return on relationship. And that's what we're saying, is move towards this top right-hand corner you will see measurable lag, but also you will see the lead behaviors of improved relationships coming through very, very quickly.
Okay, we're just about out of time, so let me just play for you a summary of what we've talked about, which we've just gone through. Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you to IntraHire very much for sharing their insights too, which I think really shows you how you can measure this stuff so that you can really focus on getting a return on that relationship and building that relationship capital. We are happy that we trotted through this. There's a lot of stuff there. We haven't had as much conversation we normally have. If you want to pick up on any of this, we have to have a conversation and just run through it in more detail, think how this applies to you, because we're happy to have those more bespoke conversations, of course.